Welcome to Truth Seekers, a podcast that challenges the false corporate narrative underlying social injustice and the erosion of democracy. Today, we hear about the effects of living and growing up in a human and environmental sacrifice zone. The communities of Globeville, Elyria and Swansea in North Denver, where Mary Hernandez lived for 30 years. She vividly recalls the first I-70 highway build in the 1960s, dividing her community in half. I-70 and I-25 were built to intersect North Denver neighborhoods of Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea in the 1950s and 60s. Numerous train tracks intersect the communities, amplifying environmental and noise pollution. Current excavation by Denver and the Colorado Department of Transportation for the purpose of tripling and lowering the highway footprint through North Denver communities to intersect a floodplain and the largely unremediated Superfund site might seem to many residents a horror version of the movie Groundhog Day, as they relive their worst nightmare, a repeat I-70 highway dig, exacerbated by what they now know about the Vasquez Blvd I-70 Superfund site. In this North Denver zip code 80216, named the most toxic U.S. zip code in 2017, environmental shortcuts have been the rule rather than the exception. The Sierra Club cited the lowering of pollution standards by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2016, violating the Federal Clean Air Act's ambient air quality standards. The Environmental Impact Statement for I-70 expansion, written by the Colorado Department of Transportation, failed to account for effects of very fine particulate vehicle pollutants, PM 2.5, which are particularly toxic within 1,000 feet of a highway, are directly linked to increased rates of childhood leukemia, 50% higher mortality rate from cardiovascular disease, high rates of obesity and asthma, and impaired cognitive development in children. A recent massive study links exposure to vehicle particulates with development of type 2 diabetes. By April 6, 2019, when Mayor Hancock and District 9 Council member Albus Brooks appeared 1 month before the city elections to break ground for a pedestrian bridge over railroad tracks, a bridge that neighbors had requested for decades. Neighbors vocalized their frustrations to the Channel 7 reporter and others on the scene.
But more often than not, trains block the intersection.
Up to 25, 30 minutes sometimes.
Sometimes even an hour.
Affecting about 100 students at Swansea Elementary.
Kids are frequently late because of the train.
Just ask the school's principal.
It's a huge impact on their learning.
So today, city officials broke ground on a new pedestrian bridge in an area that's no stranger to construction. The Central 70 project is also underway here.
We're more than left behind. I mean, we're an afterthought.
But some residents say neither project addresses the real issue.
We've been neglected for over 100 years. I mean, as you can see, we don't even have adequate sidewalks in here.
This bridge, people have been fighting for this since, I think before the 50s. And so for us to barely get the bridge now and then still have issues of the pollution and all of the construction, it's not coming in the right order. The city, they come out here and make it look like a party when they're really ignoring a lot of important issues, health, safety concerns that the community has been raising for years.
Neighbors with Ditch the Ditch signs voiced opposition to the I-70 expansion project.
I love how Albus said we were protesting the bridge.
Oh,
he's like, listen to these people, they're protesting the bridge.
Represented the whole thing.
Some advocated the I-270, I-76 bypass north of Swansea, Elyria that would permit reconnection of the neighborhoods, an option that many felt had not been given serious consideration by the city and CDOT. The school's principal worried about continued significant displacement of people in the community caused by the massive construction project, which had already removed 56 homes and 17 businesses.
While Principal Munoz is worried about what the future of this area will look like.
Very quickly became apparent that they were going to get priced out of their own community and that it was likely not going to benefit them in the long run.
The question now is whether their families will be able to stay here once all the construction dust has settled.
This is really destabilizing the neighborhood, and that's definitely heartbreaking.
In Swansea, Megan Lopez, Denver 7.
Mary Hernandez and I met up on a slightly overcast day in the fall of 2018 on the block where she grew up in the Swansea neighborhood of North Denver. The area had been bulldozed into piles of dirt. The only remaining trace of Mary's childhood home were concrete steps from the street. Dump trucks rearranged piles of dirt as winds gusted dust across the Superfund site. Freight trains intermittently sounded their approach on tracks a couple of blocks to the north. Mary Hernandez grew up in Swansea within the bounds of the Vasquez Blvd I-70 Superfund Site before it was declared a Superfund Site. As a child in the 60s, Mary witnessed the bisection of her Swansea Elyria neighborhood by construction of the Interstate 70 highway. Her family home at 46 in York Street ultimately faced the I-70 West on-ramp.
You notice that we're right next to the highway here? My dad actually built a bunch of apartments hooked onto the house. He had to dig a foundation out in the back of the house, so we dug the soil there too. He liked to fix up houses and make them better for people, and he was a big advocate for the neighborhood. His name is Joe Montoya. So we were always helping him, always working.
Unaware of Superfund soil contamination, many neighbors dug basements and planted gardens. Mary's family dug the dirt and moved it multiple times by hand, loading and unloading it to a truck. Mary describes how the EPA performed superficial remediation in the Superfund site, reportedly removing a few inches of topsoil in some yards, adding clean dirt on top.
This is a Superfund site, this whole area here, like 4 miles. They've come and dug up a couple, 3-4 inches and put some new dirt over it. Didn't help much, I'm sure. And some of the houses were done 3 or 4 inches. I don't know, they're telling me 12 inches, but I saw what they did to a couple of houses that were owned here in the neighborhood. And it was like 3 or 4 inches that was taken out. And they covered it up with good soil. So can you imagine 3 or 4 inches and what the wind's gonna do to take it away in a good windy day? There is a lot of contamination in the soil from the smelters from the early 1900s, late 1800s.
As early as the 1870s, multiple smelters in the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea neighborhoods refined gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc. The legacy of smelters and other industries since the 19th century contaminated North Denver soil with a chemical soup. Arsenic, lead, zinc, cadmium, asbestos from a landfill, as well as benzene and VOCs, volatile organic compounds from refineries. Also classified as human carcinogens, Superfund soil contaminants are reported systemic toxicants that can induce multiple organ damage, even at low levels of exposure. Cadmium, arsenic, lead, and zinc are known as endocrine-disrupting chemicals that easily transfer to a fetus across the placenta and can adversely affect reproductive, neurological, and immune systems, and are linked to abnormal growth patterns and neurodevelopmental delays in children, as well as cancers. Mary relates some of the health effects on several generations of her family.
Later on, I lived over here on 4395 Columbine Street when I was pregnant. I actually found out that property was very contaminated, and I landed up having a baby, and she grew up okay, pretty good, and then she landed up having 2 babies, which they were born blind with something called septo-optic dysplasia, where you're blind, and one of them had cerebral palsy, and the other one had a lot of hormone problems and just disabilities that were really hard. I have a nephew that has cerebral palsy, and I actually have another nephew that has cerebral palsy. So there's been a lot of things in the family that have happened because of the soil contamination, and I'm sure because of the traffic up there, the benzene and whatever there is up there. I mean, we've had people in our family die from cancer, a lot of cancer in the family, just a lot of different hormonal things that go on with the thyroid and different things that a lot of us have. We have a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. That's why I'm worried about the noise that's going to be coming here pretty soon when the trucks start really working, when they start taking down the highway, when they start digging. I'm worried about the people that they hired in the neighborhood to do the digging for Kiewit. I think it's like the meanest thing you could do is to hire people from the neighborhood to dig this ditch 40 feet down under the ground with the contaminated soil all over there. I'm concerned about where they're going to take this poisonous soil. When they start digging it up, where's it going to go? I mean, is it going to go someplace safe that other people in other neighborhoods don't get contaminated? The dust is just going everywhere. It's not only going to affect the people that are here in Swansea, Elyria, and Globeville. It's going to affect the north side. It's going to affect the east side. It's going to affect Aurora. It's going to affect Montbello, because this dust that's going to be pulled out of 40 feet of digging is going to affect a lot of people. Because what has happened to us has been a real tragedy, and I would hate to see this happen to the other people in the neighborhood.
Mary reports a lot of reproductive effects in her family.
Actually, my older sister had 9 miscarriages. There's been a lot of things happen with my sisters as far as having babies. They didn't come to full term, or they've had a lot of hysterectomies and different things through the years. A lot of rheumatoid arthritis is in the family. A couple of people in my family, my daughter for one, she had her back fused together. So they just did surgery, 2 surgeries in her back. And my sister-in-law now has had her back fused together, so she's going to have surgery real soon.
A 2015 city report focusing on North Denver acknowledged the health effects of noise, citing how, quote, long-term exposure to moderate levels of noise can adversely affect sleep, school, and work performance and increase risk of cardiovascular disease, end quote. Nevertheless, the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment in July 2018 granted tentative approval to contractor Kiewit Meridian's request for a nighttime noise variance. The final change permits constant elevation of daily noise levels all day, every day, the duration of the Central 70 Highway construction project. It seemed yet another David versus Goliath battle in a long series of such struggles that have not boded well for the people.
The train is right here, so every time they go down, a lot of noise. But there's going to be a lot of noise right here. And they start digging this hole, and they start doing this highway here. I'm concerned about the noise that's going to happen here with all the trucks, because that noise, it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. It causes sleep apnea. A lot of my family has these things from the first highway going up, from the train being on the corner. It's going to be pretty tremendous because people have lack of sleep, and it's going to cause a lot of health issues.
Historically, the Environmental Protection Agency named areas like the GES neighborhoods environmental justice communities, often home to predominantly minority populations, and described as, quote, overburdened, suffering undue burden of environmental pollution. The city's and CDOT's consistent effort to lower and expand I-70 at the expense of health and environmental effects reinforce the status of the North Denver neighborhoods of Swansea, Elyria, and Globeville as a human and environmental sacrifice zone.
I was here for the first highway put in, and this is what it seemed like to me, that my life was just carefree. I mean, we just had so much fun, walking around barefoot. We planted gardens, which that's not a good idea either. And it seemed like after the dig and after the highway went up, people's attitudes and personalities and everything began to change. They were in bad moods. They were not doing very good. In fact, even my parents, I mean, they were affected. All of us were affected. It was a whole change of our personalities, of what we were going through, and not enough sleep, and it was just, I don't know, people just changed. The school changed, the teachers changed, everything changed in the neighborhood.
Thank you for joining Truth Seekers, advocating for human and environmental health, and the most sustainable universal health insurance model, a single large risk pool, Medicare for all health insurance. Until next time, Truth Seekers produced at Denver Open Media. Music mix by Tim Johnson. Underwriting by Healthcare for All Colorado Foundation. This is Michelle Swenson, producer of Truth Seekers Podcast.